Good morning, everyone. It is July 31st, and I'm going to talk about what's going on around Ukraine on the battlefield. I'm going to focus somewhat on Crimea, as well as the northern region, where we saw the Russians pushing and actually seeing some successes there. So, starting first and foremost, I'll zoom in a little bit up here in this northern region here. We originally, a couple days ago, saw Russia pushing in various areas. There's really three axes: one here, and then there was one that was up here, but they had a fourth down here that was kind of stopped, and they regrouped and moved troops to here. So really, these three are the ones we're looking at right now for what Russia has so far gained. The good news for Ukraine, though, is these gains have been stopped, and even we have even seen some of the gains given back to Ukraine, specifically in this Novohrivka region right here. So originally, if you remember, I showed you a map where the Russians had pushed hard along the tree lines and gained territory roughly like this, crossing the river, etc. There's various forests in this area, and the Russians were using the tree line to get to the Ukrainian defenses and actually bypass the river and things like that. There's a river that runs right here. So Ukraine was able to stop the advance of the Russians because this is high ground. This is higher ground. It's not super high. It's only about 30 to 50 meters higher, but it is significant, but it is out in the open. The Russians could not use the terrain to their benefit, and trying to cross the river with equipment was very difficult. So they were just using light infantry that were walking on foot, and Ukraine, having the high ground with mechanized equipment as well as artillery, were able to not only stop the Russian advance but push it back to roughly its original lines here. So some good news in that region for Ukraine. Now moving on, we'll move a bit south to show what's going on in the other area where Russia has been pushing. So this was the other line of advance here. This one, the Ukrainians have been giving ground, mainly because there's a pretty significant terrain feature in the river that runs right there, and they can't really get past that. And there's not a whole lot of, it actually runs more like this. But anyways, there's not a whole lot of significant terrain or villages that the Russians can take here. Torsk is the main defensive line, and the Ukrainians were allowing the Russians to kind of get deep into the fight, and then were pinching hard to push towards these defensive lines, these trenches, this trench system right here, and effectively trying to allow the Russians to be pulled into a double envelopment, cut off, and then these trenches would have been taken and eliminated. However, the Russians discovered this, and the battlefield has stagnated here. So the good news is the Russians are no longer moving, but the bad news is the Ukrainians have not regained this territory as of yet, but it's not a priority for them because, again, this is just a lot of open fields. You have a forested, wooded area here, and that's the if you can see this forested area, the Russians are using that in their trench system. Forested areas are harder to strike with things like drones and artillery due to their coverage. So that is what it's looking like in the north. The advances of Russia have been stopped, and up in that Novohrivka region, we have seen the Ukrainians regain a lot of their territory back. So good news there. Now moving down to Bakhmut, we can see some gains being made. Last night, there was geolocated footage of Ukrainian units, and I'll make these blue since they're Ukrainian. Ukrainian units operating behind Andriivka. There's a railroad here, and I'll actually zoom in closer for you guys. There's actually a railroad here that is kind of a key terrain feature for for both Ukraine and Russia. So this map shows Russia holding this ground. In fact, Andriivka has been largely liberated. The Russians have fallen back and set up fighting positions behind this is a bermed railway right here. So they have set up their fighting positions behind this railway in order to further defend against Ukrainian advances. But geolocated footage have shown that Ukraine has entered, if not liberated, Andriivka, which is a key supply node for the north-south axis into Bakhmut. If we zoom out, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So Bakhmut's way up here, taking Andriivka down here, and they've taken Klishchiivka down over here already. The Ukrainians really starts to put rail pressure on the Ukrainians. The Russians. The Russians are a rail logistics force. They are not a road logistics force. They are rail. So using this rail line that was running through and near Andriivka is something that the Ukrainians would like to deny the Russians for sure, meaning they would force them into using only rail lines. Now, this doesn't necessarily eliminate rail lines coming in from other regions and stuff. It just eliminates the ability for the north-south resupply, and any rail that Ukraine can take is good for Ukraine. You can kind of see exactly what is taking place here. Ukraine is using different tactics than Russia in Bakhmut. Russia, and really Wagner Group, was just using kind of a driving, grinding punch into the city to try and just drive Ukraine out using masses of forces. Ukraine is operating more in a tactical thought process here. It's not just brute force. They're wanting to conduct flank operations. So you can see they're moving across Klishchiivka, moving across Andriivka, moving up and trying to punch through towards Krasnohora, etc. So they can once again surround and deny north-south logistics and deny logistics to any troops in this region, and then just again make it untenable for Russia to stay there. So that's what it looks like in Bakhmut. Very small gains, but gains nonetheless. It's a very grinding effort, and I can't stress this enough. The Ukrainians, unfortunately, in the offensive are going to lose a significant amount of forces. They have a very robust recovery system for tanks, but we are going to see tanks lost. We're going to see them not necessarily destroyed, but disabled, and they will recover them and get repaired. But that is still combat power that is leaving the battlefield in real time, but it's not necessarily that it is completely catastrophic in loss. These Leopard tanks are very robust in their ability to be repaired. A lot of times you'll see these tanks have their tracks blown off. That is not a catastrophic destruction. That is absolutely repairable, recoverable, and they have the assets to do that, plus the backing, especially in Poland and also within Ukraine itself. Okay, now we're going to move on to what is the biggest news probably everyone's looking at. When you go south towards Crimea, I'm going to zoom way out here. So we all know that Ukraine has been trying to take out the Kerch Bridge, trying to essentially eliminate the ability of Russia to move logistics into Crimea from this route. Well, if they can't successfully eliminate the rail line here, because it's just the distances are great, they just don't have the right equipment, they don't want to take chances with Storm Shadows or their aircraft, or drone boats are being denied the area because Elon Musk is being a dick about it, or about the Starlink system, or just that capability is limited. The next best possibility is eliminating bridges north of Crimea, so up here. So that's what we've seen just recently right here. This is where the big discussion right now of a bridge in Chonhar is been destroyed. This is a rail bridge that they have destroyed, and it crosses here. So logistics, the way the logistics flow, and I've said this before, they come in through here, they have major depots in here, and they split and head out. They also have depots down here, and they split and go this way. So this is how logistics moves. You have two crossing points, rail and road, when it comes to moving logistics from Russia into the battlefield, the front lines up here. And those two roads, as I said, are here and here. Well, incidentally, these two roads are major targets for Ukraine, with the easier of the two being Chonhar right here. The reason is it's a bridge. So we'll go ahead and zoom in and show you what exactly took place over the last 24 hours in Ukraine destroying it. So what they essentially did is they destroyed the rail crossing right here. They took it out and destroyed it, making rail impossible, at least until repaired. The extent of the damage is not known. There are images that show the rail was pretty significantly damaged. However, it looks like the damage was more on the berming. The rail line was destroyed, obviously, but if the bridge itself wasn't destroyed, which there's not any really confirmation that it was, that rail line can be reconnected. The difference is, with regard to this, it stops logistics at least for a few days. If that's the case, if the bridge was actually damaged or destroyed, then it stops logistics for a significantly longer time. This means that the Russians have lost access to using this bridge to resupplying their front. And so what happened, the times that it takes to get logistics to the front line, whether it's up in Kherson, whether we're talking Zaporizhia, etc., takes longer. And you can see what the alternatives are for Ukraine or for Russia in this regard. So if the original logistics lines went like this to the front line, or like this to the front line, or like this and then spread out to the front line, all Russia has now is this sector here and this over here. And trust me, this is being heavily targeted right now. So with the elimination of this capability, there's only two routes into Ukraine for supplying the front line for Russia. It's going this route and then spreading it across the front line, or they go this route and then spreading it. That's not tenable. That's you need multiple routes. The additional time to take this route, then to cut back, as well as exposure to attack from artillery or rockets or storm shadows, makes this very difficult for Russia to maintain. So Ukraine continues to take the approach of eliminating Russia's strategic and logistical capabilities in the rear, hitting headquarters, hitting bridges, hitting weapons transfer points, ammunitions depots, etc. in Crimea, as well as in various regions in the rear echelons of this war. So that's where we're at for right now. Thank you guys for watching.